What happens when the church praises service and sacrifice, but ignores the invisible labor that makes ministries, family, and daily life possible? I'm not a parent, but I've seen how much unseen work caregivers do. Churches love to celebrate moms on Mother's Day, naming all the hats they wear and applauding their dedication and maybe subtly making fun of husbands not doing enough work. But what about the rest of the year? When someone is sick, exhausted, or quietly managing the weight of a household or a community, where's the church then? Too often we idolize doing more while overlooking those who are already doing more than enough. In this episode, we're talking about the unseen burdens that caregivers, neurodivergent people, and others carry, and how the church often fails to notice or support them. We'll explore what it looks like, especially for mothers, but also other caregivers and individuals, to resist the idol of overfunctioning, of doing everything, and we'll remember that our worth is not in our output. Our guest today is Sunita Theiss, who brings us a unique and deeply compassionate perspective on the intersection of parenting, neurodiversity, and Christian faith. After 15 years in marketing communications, Sunita made a dramatic shift to care for her children, which led to discovering that both she and her kids are neurodivergent. Now, Sunita works to create trauma informed, neurodiversity affirming spaces in churches, schools, and homes. Welcome to Christianity Without Compromise. I'm your host, Jake Doberenz, and in each episode we focus on Jesus alone and not the other idols we put in his place. Now let's start smashing those idols. Sunita, thank you for being on Christianity Without Compromise.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. You come with a very unique perspective and experiences. And I'm just always down to hear these kind of things, especially as somebody who is, like I mentioned, not a parent. So some of this stuff isn't apparent to me. Sorry,
I
I
see what you did
apologize for the
there. Yeah.
pun. But yeah, exactly. Well, I just want to jump in. There's some good stuff we got to get to, some really interesting topics I want to explore as we move the church, move Christians back to some of the central teachings. But let's start with this. Earlier this year, you were diagnosed with POTS and had to miss several Sundays of church, had to miss a lot of church. And you did get some phone calls from people that missed you, but mostly when you just missed the Sunday service. They were checking in to see why you weren't attending. What did that experience reveal to you about churches and what it seems like they actually care about?
Yeah. So last fall, I began to get very sick, and we really couldn't figure out what was going on. And I was struggling to get out of bed. My symptoms were getting progressively worse. You mentioned like my kids and I are all neurodivergent. We even paused therapies for my kids. My closest friends, some of our church leaders, knew what was going on. And they were very supportive. But the thing that stood out to me most was that people I didn't know as well were getting around to calling me on Mondays and Tuesdays to check in. It didn't always feel like it was about how I was doing and what support I might need, but more about making sure I was showing up. So they'd observed they hadn't seen me. So it was more of a, we missed you on Sunday, as opposed to how are you really doing? And it began to spark a question in me that was like, does my wellness matter during the week or only my attendance on Sunday? I just started thinking about like how often we equate discipleship with showing up on Sundays rather than showing up in more tangible ways. And I've had a lot of uncomfortable conversations with people since then about, if you 7 times 24 is 168. So we have 168 hours in the week. And We maybe spend 2 on Sundays, and even if you factor out like the hours that we spend sleeping, there are countless hours throughout the week where we can connect with one another, that we can be a presence in each other's lives outside of those couple of hours. And so, um, are we more than the bodies in just the chairs or the pews? What does the body of Christ mean to each other? And Monday to Saturday should be just as valuable. What does it look like to serve and come alongside each other the rest of the week too? Some churches do a Wednesday night type of fellowship thing again, but like, what about the other days of the week? And for me, it's like, I don't want a meal train, right? Like, that's really the other thing we just offer. And what else can we do? How else can we be human with each other? And I don't think we fully grasp what moms do if all we are like is, well, we'll feed you because you feed your family, so we'll just bring you food. And I'm like, well, we've got dietary restrictions, we've got a lot of sensory needs, there are appointments we're driving to. I was trying to figure out what was going on with my health, so it was, the mountain of needs, and the mental load really is like, I need very unique specific types of caregiving. I need to be transported to appointments. There's like a juggling of things. I homeschool, I have client work, like, and it becomes almost a snowball of support that is invisible to just about anybody outside of my home.
Wow, thanks for sharing that and being raw and transparent about those things, because that's challenging to kind of face that. And on top of the struggles itself, kind of thinking, oh, am I just a pew filler, a seat filler? Is that my identity? Former guest of the show, he was episode 42 back in July. Michael Clemens taught me the word churchianity. Not original to him, but his complaint, if you will, his critique was, it's faith is so much about showing up at church. It's all about going to church, this and that. It's like, hold on here. It's not churchianity. It's Christianity. It's about Christ. We have a new identity. It's supposed to be a family, right? And when the New Testament talks about family, it is definitely not as some kind of Western conceptions. It's a much different idea where, yeah, it is showing up for people throughout the week, and it's doing more than a meal train. Not that they had that concept in the New
Right.
Testament. It's so much more than that, and I think it is incredibly important that we start the episode with that reminder of faith is much bigger than showing up on Sundays, Wednesdays, that kind of thing. I did the math once. Math not my specialty, but I did the math once, and assuming you go a couple hours on Sunday, maybe an hour Wednesday night, if you're like extra holy kind of thing, that's like 2% of your week. That's 2% of the hours in a week, and that is just that's tiny, and that matters. And gathering's good, but what about the other 98%? How you living as the body of Christ at those times? How you interacting with people? All that stuff. So again, thanks for setting the stage with that story. That's why I asked my guests to set the stage with story. We help to get to know them, and we really see how this impacts people. Well, to get a little more specific here, there's this idea floating around that kind of glorifies motherhood as a calling, but then minimizes its struggles, stigmatizes women who do admit that they're overwhelmed. It stigmatizes that, and it feels like another classic example of church culture praising an ideal, but then somehow still crushing people under it. So when it comes to the ways that we treat motherhood, how do you see this dynamic floating around in churches and religious circles? And what's the result of this mentality?
Yeah, in churches, motherhood gets held up as this beautiful sacred calling, and it is. I won't I won't say it's not. It's the coolest thing I've ever done. But we're also painted a picture of this tireless, joyful, endlessly capable woman. And the tired, lonely, overwhelmed parts of caregiving are minimized, or worse, they are stigmatized. And if a woman dares to admit she is having a hard time, she risks being met with shame or silence or some version of like, maybe you just don't have enough faith, or you're sinning in some capacity. Um, and we're praised for self-sacrifice, but the actual support is scarce. And usually the only people supporting moms are other moms. And I recently had to do a mold remediation in my house, and I'm also going through a divorce, and the only people who showed up were other homeschool moms, right? Like this this like army of moms descended, right? All of us have little kids, and we had to find people to watch our kids, and they came and packed up my house. And we are the ones with less capacity. We are the ones who have kids to watch. We are the ones who have to do all the logistical maneuvering. And only one man showed up. One pastor from my church showed up to help. And in the unpacking, other men showed up to help me. But it was like that day I had like 24 hours to make this thing happen. And it was just a bunch of women with young kids. And we get things done. And also, we're told to do this joyfully, without complaint. And we internalize these impossible expectations that we should never need to rest. We should do this endlessly giving. And then when you end up having a diagnosis like mine, where doing that will make my blood pressure tank and I will faint. Hopefully not in public, hopefully not while I'm driving a car. Right? Like then those consequences are extremely dire. And one of the most weaponized scriptures here is Proverbs 31, right? Like that she's described as never faltering, always working, managing everything with grace. And for many of us, this isn't inspiring. It's crushing. And our enough is never enough. And we end up feeling like failures who can never live up. And the church ends up not becoming a place of rest and renewal and support. It becomes another place of pressure and judgment and anxiety, and then you layer on top of that a cultural narrative that caregiving is menial and undervalued labor, and having come from corporate America, where we overvalue productivity and output and ROI, and you've got a perfect recipe for burnout.
Yeah. Wow. That's real. That's real stuff right there. It is crazy that awkward tension, as you mentioned. It's like we expect mothers, caretakers to do everything, but then at the same time, kind of devalue them. Um, Not a parent myself, as mentioned, but I have been a public and private school teacher, and I know there's an expectation similar to teachers. It's like they're expected to do everything. I'm part therapist and coach and whatever and blah blah blah, but then also not well paid, not respected. And motherhood's got to be even more extreme version of that. Yeah. So how do we get into that? Like, do you have a why? Is there a reason that all the moms showed up and the men didn't? What happened here? Any idea?
Well, I mean, some of it is probably the time of day, right? Like it was a weekday during the day, and we have this split. I think, especially in Christian spaces, right? There tend to be less dual income families, right? Men tend to work out of the home. We are staying home and homeschooling our kids. I'm sort of a rare breed in that I work for myself and I'm homeschooling, and um, and so I mean I had even on the weekends, like my friends who came and helped on the weekends were also primarily women. Um, I think it's just that, like, we are used to running the logistics, and some of that has to do with, we see a lot in, I mean, since I think that the concept of like emotional labor first was introduced into the literature in like the 80s. Then we've seen things like mental load is how we talk about it now. But it's like we're constantly carrying so much in our minds. And so I don't want to say it's like I'll do it myself type of mentality, but sometimes it's easier to just say, it'll take me 10 less steps to just say, I'll figure out where to put the kids and I'll go do it, than to say, I'm going to have to negotiate your schedule to my spouse or partner and work out all the logistics of getting you here and getting.
Yeah, that makes sense. That does make sense. I've heard that a lot from women. I don't talk about it a lot, but I have been previously married, um, and that ended, and that was a wake up call, especially about some of the ways that the emotional labor and the roles and things. And um, I'm engaged now and getting married, and we'll have be married pretty close to when this episode comes out, and doing a lot of reading and making sure that we don't fall into these patterns where the wife or the mother, yeah, ends up doing all that emotional labor and things. I really enjoy a book. I'll just throw this out for people. I really enjoy a book called The 80/80 Marriage. It's not a religious book, but in that way, it was actually kind of refreshing. But just to say that it's not about one partner doing all the work, but neither is it necessarily splitting it 50-50. Each person has to kind of go above and beyond and be a team. But I'm digressing here. I'm processing what you're saying and hearing your perspective here, and seeing it in my own life as a dude. Where that I can see how that falls on women, that burden particularly. So again, thank you for sharing and being honest and raw with us. So, in simple terms, what's our alternative here? We're the Christianity Without Compromise podcast. We want that Christianity without the baggage, without the yucky culture war stuff, without the craziness. We love Jesus. We want the Jesus part of it. So, what is our uncompromised version, and what's the virtue that we can begin to replace this bad thinking, would you say?
I think what we need is an honest theology of limits, like a theology of enough. Scripture never calls us to be superhuman or limitless. In fact, I think it constantly points to our dependence on God, on one another. It calls us to community, it calls us to each other. Jesus rested, right? Like he withdrew from crowds, he allowed others to care for him, he honored his own humanity in his time on this earth. And so I think instead of glorifying endless output, we need to honor our enoughness, right? Like our faithfulness doesn't need to look like pushing ourselves past our breaking point. I think we need to probably more openly admit that we are finite, and we need to grapple with trusting God to be enough. And I think for pastors, we need to hear what that sounds like on Sunday mornings. They need to talk to us about that more, and we need to hear how they are wrestling with not being machines capable of endless output. I remember when I first became a Christian in my 20s, and I was attending a church, and my pastor took a sabbatical. They were extremely mindful of making sure they were not a church centered around a figurehead, where one person preached every
Nice.
Sunday, and they had a sort of a rotation of people, and everyone took time off. Like they took months off in a certain, I can't remember if it was every couple of years or what, but like they intentionally took time to rest and get away, and they were not allowed to work. And I remember being like, what is this? I was like, is this a thing Christians do? It was not a thing Christians did. It was a thing they did as part of their walk in their faith at that church. And it was mind blowing to me because I didn't understand the concept of a Sabbath was confusing to me as a new Christian. But that was modeled really beautifully. I still wrestle with it. I still struggle with resting. My body has forced me to in this season of having an illness. And now I have a chronic illness, so I'm having to relearn like what capacity and enough means. But I think understanding that virtue of having enough, of being enough, of knowing when enough is enough, frees us from pretending to be limitless. And also, I think it opens the door to building actual, authentic communities of support. Like that actually opens the door to being the church the rest of the week outside of that 1% of time, right? And you know, you look at scripture, Moses's mother who saved a life with reeds in a basket, or you know, the woman who prepared Jesus's body in this sort of misunderstood and bizarre way. Even the first 30 years of Jesus's life, right? Like we don't have a documentation of that. He was doing ordinary, unseen work, but he was faithful in that work he was doing. He was doing the work his father called him to do. Most of us are doing ordinary, faithful human work. And we have to trust that it is enough because it is what God is calling us to do. And so I think perhaps what we need to recover in understanding our limits is just that, like, that's usually enough. That's usually what God is calling us to. And he wants to honor our ordinary presence as holy because God knows we're finite. He made us that way.
An honest theology of limits. That's incredibly powerful. That's really important for all of us to hear. I do a lot of research. Hopefully, my next book project is going to be on efficiency as kind of the idol of our age, optimization, productivity. Right? That's that's everybody's obsessed with that, and even I fall into the habit. Anybody asks me, "So how's it going?" My first response is, "Keeping busy, staying busy," and I have to stop myself. Like, wait, that's supposed to be the response. You're supposed to be busy. You're supposed to be doing everything, but we can't. We cannot. Mother, father, whoever, we can't do everything. We need to recognize that limitation. And you brought up Jesus. Of course, Jesus takes rest. Jesus takes those breaks. You brought up Sabbath. That's incredibly important. Oh yeah, Christians who are like Christians for like their entire lives don't even really understand the whole Sabbath thing. You know, it's that one Ten Commandments. Like, do we do that one still? I'm confused about that one. Um, but it's an important practice that God put in place with God's people of saying, "Hey, take a break, stop, don't be productive." Even if everybody else in society is working that day, you don't. And that is something that is still, its spiritual legacy is still really important. Appreciate you bringing that to the surface. So, if you had the ear of some church leaders today, you mentioned systems of support and things like that. Like, what do you want to recommend here to change the narrative? If you're talking to church leaders, what do we change in our church structures, our liturgies, our leadership cultures, whatever, that they currently reinforce these burdens, but maybe what you recommend to call them to a way where they can support the people who are doing it all, mothers, caregivers, whoever?
Yeah. First, I would say don't just preach about supporting caregivers, but build it into the structure and the budget of your church. So make things like childcare at events and disability access part of your budget, not just extras. Make them essential to the ministry and the life of your church. And when I say that, I don't mean like make major like I'm not saying like do a major building project, but what I am saying is consider programming that supports the needs of the people who are already there. So, are there people attending your church who currently need respite or caregiving support right now? What can you offer them? Can you sign up? This one I do mean take meals if they need them. Like at my church, there are folks who are either shut in or disabled or recently widowed, and they do need some help with meals. Take meals. Do they need respite care? Either can the church offer a respite night, or can they support a family one night a week? Um, is there a way to support accessible transportation? Is someone just having a hard time getting to church? Or when they're there, do they just need support getting to communion? Like, can you have a rotating sign up for that? There's so much dignity in just giving them that access. Or if you're a church that does communion every Sunday, can you take communion to them? Churches can also update and design programming with accessibility and inclusion at the center. That means like sensory needs, physical access, neurodivergent participation, rest for caregivers. Again, so often we make it so that kids can't like be themselves in church. Like, it is developmentally appropriate for kids to make noise and not sit still. And when someone like me who like has a hard time getting up and chasing my kids again and again and again, because that's just hard on my body, like, just say, hey, can I go for a walk with your child? Right? Like that, you know, maybe assign a buddy or something. You're helping a disabled parent as much as you're helping a neurodivergent child in that moment. Liturgically, I think we can make space to honor caregivers too. Build it into the order of service. Pray for them by name. Bless the hidden labor of parents and caregivers and guardians. Also build in rhythms into your church calendar. What was the other thing you said? Leadership culture. Stop equating holiness with busyness as leaders.
Yeah.
Pastors often model endless output, like I said. And so if your congregants are marrying than that, like, you need leaders who can say, I need rest, right? And so if the leaders are preaching about a Sabbath and taking sabbaticals, then your congregants go, okay, I know what that looks like. And so I think also, like I said, the way they're talking about caregiving, like, are you talking about caregiving as noble suffering, or are you also like meeting a need in a way that's not shaming or over spiritualizing it? And like also not treating it as like a niche ministry. So it's not an outreach project. Like, it's just the church being the church. And I think just like leaning into the fullness of the body of Christ. Like,
Yeah.
just the way that like you might come alongside someone who just had a baby, or who had a short-term illness. Like, sometimes we just need support. And sometimes our support, just the duration of support we need is longer, but it's still just support.
Yeah, I mean, what you said there at the end summarized a lot of what you're saying. Just don't make this a one-time special thing. Just build it into the whole life of the church, and
Yeah.
that's so important. It made me think of a previous episode we had with Kate Boyd. Um, she talked about being a young, childless person, and how a lot of the church is often built around children and things like that. As you've mentioned, though, they don't even get that part right all the time. But one of the things that struck me about that is just how much everything is focused on the ministry to this group and this group and this group. And she was like, where is the married without children group? Where's that ministry? I just want to be a part of the church. And it strikes me the same thing here. It's like, it doesn't have to be a special kind of ministry thing. Just make that a part of the rhythms of church. Just when somebody's in need, reach out to them. Help them out with what you can when you can. Just build that in.
I remember that episode. The same church I mentioned before, where I like encountered leadership taking sabbaticals and was blown away. Something they did was, I remember they transitioned out of a stage of life based small group to a geographically based small group.
Mm.
And so it was no longer based on, are you single? Do you have children? Or do you whatever? It's just like, we're just going to plop you down with people you live near. And so you're going to encounter people in different stages of life, but you're going to encounter more geographically proximate community, which will allow you to come alongside each other in a more tangible way. But you're going to encounter people in different stages of life, which will probably be better for you and actually probably better reflect authentic community. And so that also mitigates the like, but where do I belong piece of it. Um, and they're not I mean, no church is perfect, but like it, I think when churches start to be more thoughtful about that, right? Like that says like, hey, we're not going to start arbitrarily categorizing you, but we are going to try to more thoughtfully like put you with your neighbors, right? Like, because that's what they were doing. They said, how can we help you be good neighbors? Let's actually put you near your neighbors so you're not driving from disparate parts of town because you're in the same life stage.
Well, I love that so much. I'm not a fan of too much emphasis on age stage ministries. I feel like I keep promoting my own podcast, but way back in the early 2025, we had an episode with Dockery, who talked about at his church where they do youth ministry different and how the kids are a part of the worship and stuff like that. I'm just, to me, that's the church that I want to be a part of. That's the vision that I'm on board with. The more intergenerational, the more connected we are. Because when I see that church in Acts, they are just meeting everybody's needs. They are helping each other. Oh, you got some need over here? I'm just going to sell my land and help you out. It's just, it's hard to fathom. And yeah, a little hard to do. Let's just be real. Um, but that's just a vision that I think we need to get back to in some way, shape, or form. I mean, a lot of the issues we brought up today of uh, people thinking that, or people being told, you can do everything, or superwoman, or whatever, that's not healthy. Doing it all yourself. We need to have a space to help out each other, to be the church. It's about connection, it's about care, it's about contribution. That's that's just a vision I'm on board with. So yeah, okay. Um, I want to end today by a little bit steering the conversation. You're a multi-talented person. You got a lot of stuff, and I know you work a lot, especially with kind of on the parenting side of things, specifically with neurodivergent kids, because that's your experience. Um, and so I want to honor this part of your story. And since today we've also said we don't want to stigmatize struggle, and there could be unique challenges in that kind of parenting scenario. Why don't we just take some time, because there could be some listeners that fall into this, or there could be people like me who's been a teacher and interact with that. I'm a buddy at my church. I hang out with a kid, a sixth grader who has Down syndrome and autism, which apparently can happen at the same time, which is interesting. um, so just speak here to parents or caretakers of neurodivergent kids, especially in the church context. You probably have a lot to say, but just give us a couple things, some good truth that you want to leave with them.
Yeah. How to do this briefly. I will say, so I'm an autistic and ADHD mom of two autistic kids. So I know firsthand how isolating and sometimes overstimulating church can be, and sometimes church is just not accessible, and that's okay. So it is okay if church is not accessible. It is okay if you need to take a break from church. It is okay if you feel like you are carrying invisible labor that church is not acknowledging. It sucks that that is how it feels. The advocating, the adapting, the planning, the constant vigilance. So I said it's okay, but it's not okay. But it is okay to be in this season right now, because you won't be in this season forever. Because you're not failing if your family doesn't look like everyone else's, because it doesn't need to. It doesn't need to look like the cultural idea of a perfect Christian household, because that doesn't actually exist. because God doesn't measure your worth by productivity or perfection, and He honors your presence and your love and your endurance. And the caregiving you're doing is holy work. And even if the church, small c, an individual church, has not named it that way. I'm also going to say that one study, I think from 2008 or 9, once estimated that parents of autistic children experience stress levels comparable to combat soldiers. So if you're stressed, it's real. Um, and if you're also neurodivergent, autistic adults tend to face higher rates of stress and mental health struggles than their non-autistic peers. So that's also real. And so if you feel like you're in survival mode, you might be. And that's also unseen and exhausting. And like I said before, I think Jesus is noticing and with us in those small and ordinary acts of service. And so God sees you in those too. And if you're a church leader listening, I would say don't just make space for neurodivergent families, be transformed by them. The presence of families that don't look like the other families in your churches can empower and teach your communities about interdependence and grace. And sometimes a little disruption is a good thing.
Great, great. And I know you could have said way more, because I know you lead workshops and things like that, and you've offered your wisdom in formats like that. And we'll get to in a second, your plugs or links, whatever you want to send people. But I just want to wrap up the main part of the conversation by just saying that we've talked about caregivers, we've talked about mothers, we've talked about neurodivergent, we've talked about all these kind of different groups. But what I really want people to hear today, whatever category they fall into, it is a reminder that you're not valued by your God does not value you by your productivity. Take a break. It's okay. You don't have to have the entire world on your shoulders. So, thank you. Well, as I just said, let's move to that part where you can point people in all the directions you want them to go, what you're doing with your life, whatever you want to shout out here. Sunita, tell us.
Yeah. My website is sunitatheiss.com. I post workshops, some free resources. I have a download on there right now that's some biblical affirmations for neurodivergent kids. It's great. We printed them out and laminated them, and my kids and I just like to play with them and have them around the house. I do writing workshops and parenting workshops, especially about like PDA, which we didn't even talk about. So if people have questions about that, they can DM me. I'm on Instagram at Sunita Theiss, and then I'm on Substack as well. And I don't have a cadence at all to that. So just sign up and you'll get a surprise in your inbox from time to time. So those are the places to find me. And I'm pretty active on Instagram. So if people want to reach out, I'm happy to chit chat further. Planning to write more about this specifically, about enough and sort of being in our bodies and being caregivers pretty soon. So y'all should see more of that.
Great, thank you for that. And can you define, mostly for my sake, maybe for listeners' sake, can you define PDA? Because I don't think you mean public display of affection.
No, I don't. It is a neurotype. It is a cluster of traits that PDA stands for pathological demand avoidance. It is sometimes understood as a profile of autism, where kids and adults frequently experience like extreme anxiety. It sometimes is described as like an overactive fight or flight state. So one of my kids has been identified as PDA. I have been too, actually, and I've just done a lot of therapy, and I have a fully developed brain, so I can have some coping skills that my kids just can't access yet because they're still growing. So so it's most of the research out there is still developing. It's not in the DSM yet, but I did a workshop recently about thinking about PDA in a Christian context. I have a replay on my website if people want to check it out. But yeah, so hopefully doing some more of that.
Sounds like you have tons of great resources there.
Thanks.
And yeah, everybody we'll send everybody that way. Throw
Thanks.
some of those links in the show notes, or we do publish this on Substack, so this might just be on the Substack too, and all that, and we'll tag you there as well. Well, we have one last question. Everybody gets it, but one of the most impactful parts of the show is just this last chance here to leave us with something that we can take into our lives related to the conversation or not. So here is your question. As we close, leave the audience with just one practical action they can do this week to live out their faith fully for Jesus.
I would encourage your listeners to look for someone in their community who is perhaps carrying some kind of invisible labor or some kind of like burden, like a caregiver, a disabled parent, a single mom. And maybe instead of just praising their strength, ask a practical question or try to meet a tangible need. What support would make their week easier? It might be bringing a meal, running an errand, sitting with their child for a couple hours while they're working, or just folding laundry, or go fold their laundry if they're willing to let you. Some people are weird about that. And so, yeah, just don't admire them. Just offer to share the load. Find a way to show up for them in like a really ordinary way, and see how that feels and how you can build community that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you just gotta ask. Maybe be specific. I don't know. I don't know what you think about this, but I've found like if you say, "Hey, what can I do for you?" my mind goes blank, and I'm like, "Nothing." I remember that a lot. That when my dad passed, that question constantly. But then people would say, "Hey, can we?" To my mom, can we mow the lawn? Can we do
Yeah.
that? Like, specifics, I think, were a lot more helpful. Yeah, actually, that is a thing you can do. And so that is a great encouragement to leave us all with. Well, I also want to leave everybody with a sharing challenge. Who can you share this episode with? Well, today, I look for those caregivers and the mothers and the single parents and the whoever that's carrying those invisible burdens. Give them this, and just as a subtle reminder that you're okay, you're enough, it's all right. But also maybe send this to your pastor, your churches, if you're brave enough, and say, hey, there's some ways we can change things so we don't unfairly put so much burdens on people. There's a lot of invisible burdens, and we don't want to stack those more onto people. So, Sunita, thank you so much for being here. Really do appreciate it today.
Thank you. This was great.
Yeah, it was. I'd like to think
It was.
so.
This was awesome.
Okay, good. Thank you for listening to Christianity Without Compromise. We just had a great episode, and I encourage you to put into practice the wisdom and advice that you received. Please subscribe to the podcast and newsletter at jakedoberenz.substack.com. That way, right in your inbox, every Tuesday you'll receive the new episode, and on Fridays you'll receive a newsletter written by me that tells a funny or interesting story with a spiritual point. This episode was recorded by me, Jake Doberenz, in conjunction with Theophany Media, my podcast production company. Please rate and review the show on your favorite podcast player, and don't forget to share your favorite episodes with your friends and your enemies. Thank you so much for all your support, and we look forward to bringing you another great episode next week.